So like when I say democracy, I mean like literal, actual democracy, right? This is from a Swiss canton called Appenzell Interholden, where they do like quarterly like live democracy in air. And the reason true democracy works in this case is you have a synchronous communication medium, which is line of sight. You know, the thing is, consensus mechanisms require n-squared communication, right? And it works in this democracy case because you have a synchronous communication mechanism. We have Temperman consensus. It works really well, but it still requires this like n-squared communication. So, and we knew this when we were designing this whole cosmos vision, and we said, okay, look, green systems are really good at some point. To make the system scale, we needed, what we did was we invented a system of connecting green systems together, right? We said, okay, we're gonna have subsystems we call them blockchains, but they have to be connected via a mechanism of allowing green systems to still coordinate with each other. We call this protocol the IBC protocol. But now the question remains, what is the meta topology of the network? How are these green systems all going to interact with each other? And it seems like the general consensus throughout the crypto space is that we're going to have this like very hub and spoke style architecture. Everyone wants to build this, right? Like Polkadot is building this with their parachains, Ethereum's building this with their rollups, and it's like, I don't know. For me, if all we end up is building another hub and spoke architecture, like this entire Cosmos vision was like, it was a waste of time, right? Like we didn't really accomplish anything. What we really want to be building is some sort of mesh system. One way of doing it, maybe, I don't know, this is like a crazy idea. You can run Tendermint over IBC, and you have this like meta Tendermint protocol happening between blockchains. Maybe it works, it'd be a cool experiment, but the thing is, like, to build internet scale stuff, you see green systems require like voting basically, right? That n-squared communication. And note he actually said we've rejected voting as well. He knew that green systems don't work at the scale that we want them to work. The only systems that really work at internet interchain level scale is these yellow systems, these very bottom up organic mesh network systems. And so what we want to be building towards is this like yellow mesh network of blockchains. And the cool thing is, actually, over the last couple of years, what we've done is we've built literally exactly that. This is a map of the Cosmos IBC network, and different chains have different levels of IBC connections. They connect to the chains that they care about and have economic relationships with. And we actually have this like nice, beautiful mesh network of IBC communication. That's cool, but this talk was about mesh security. How does this relate to security? So, what we can do is look at the real world. What is the greatest security system in the world? It's probably the NATO alliance. NATO is not a one empire that's colonies. We tried that for thousands of years. What NATO is it's a coalition of sovereign countries that have a mutual defense pact. They don't interfere in each other's internal policies. But if the famous Article 5 says that if any one of them is attacked, they all rush to each other's defense and have this like global large security measure. And really the world has a number of like sort of overlapping security measures that kind of keeps the world relatively pretty stable, actually, relative, if you're looking at the scale of human history. And so how does this relate to how it's going to work in blockchains? So in Cosmos, we've had this idea called interchain security for a while. I'll step quickly through like the evolution of the stages of interchain security. So we have like so this is like a treat this as a diagram model. So this like dark blue circle on the outside, that's a blockchain. This inner circle, that's a validator set, and the fact that there's an arrow pointing at the other circle, that means that validator set validates that blockchain. So we have the interchain, so two sovereign blockchains that say Cosmos Hub and Osmosis. They have their own sovereign validator sets, validating their own blockchain. We have the interchain security V1, where you have the validator set of one blockchain validating a second blockchain. The entire validator set of one blockchain validating another blockchain. Really, if you think about this is not that different than really just block size increase, other than you're parallelizing it a little bit better. So there are some benefits, but it's not really super interesting. And you can build this into like a larger hub and spoke system. Well, the V2 is this idea that, hey, you can have a subset of one of the blockchains validating another blockchain. And this is basically this idea of sharding, which is, that's what a lot of people have been working on, Polkadot, everyone. You can build this out, it'll work. But I think what gets really interesting is when you get into like the V3 of interchain security, where you have a sovereign blockchain like Osmosis that has its own validator set, but it can be augmented by the security of another validator set. And the world that the Cosmos Hub blockchain is building towards right now is still this like very hub and spoke system where the Cosmos Hub can help provide security and augment the security of other Cosmos blockchains. The problem is this still leads you to a very like red hub and spoke world. What really we should be building is this mesh security system. Basically, all it's saying is, hey, take interchain security V3 and run it bidirectionally. Yes, Osmosis security can be augmented by Cosmos Hub security, but Cosmos Hub can also be augmented by Osmosis security. And what's cool is if you build this out, because everything's happening bidirectionally, you can actually build this like really cool security mesh where all the blockchains and app chains are securing each other. So, let's walk through a little bit how this will work, like technically in practice. So first of all, I think it's interesting to note, like, this is just a nice heuristic to look at, but this graph basically tracks what is the validator set overlap between all of these Cosmos chains. So if you look here, let's say two chains like Osmosis and Juno, 75% of Juno validator power is also running Osmosis. Meanwhile, 72% of Osmosis validator power is also running the Juno chain. So there's clearly, like, some people might say like, hey, this is like not good. This means there's like very, a lot of centralization. I see this as a good thing. This means that there's high overlap in community and like economic stakeholdership between these communities. And we should be taking advantage of that overlap. So, arguably, I would say today we're already using something I would call like soft shared security, which is like, look, 72% overlap in validator sets. If a bunch of validators like did something malicious on Juno and stole a bunch of money, I'm pretty sure we would use governance to slash them on Osmosis as well, right? Like, that seems like the logical thing to do. This is like this like soft, unspoken thing. I think what we should do is actually codify it, build it into the protocol itself. And to do that, we propose something called cross-staking. So what cross-staking means is, imagine you have one validator, notional, they're validating two different chains, both Osmosis and Juno. What they can do is they can actually correlate their identities on both of these chains. And you can do this by signing transactions from accounts on both the chains, and they can like correlate and say like, hey, yes, we are validating both chains. And what will happen then is if they produce a toxic malicious block, does something malicious on Osmosis, they're gonna get slashed and burned on both chains. So, question is though, why would they do this? Well, they're obviously increasing their risk by doing this, right? Why are you putting more assets up at risk? The thing is, you can economically incentivize this because what you can do is you can prove to both blockchains that, like, hey, I've cross-staked on Juno and on Osmosis, and both chains can give a slight increase in, voting power for doing this, and all the validators will be economically incentivized to do this sort of cross-staking. Wouldn't this lead to validator centralization though? Like, so, let's say you have a validator notional and a validator figment. They're both running on Osmosis, but imagine notional also cross-staked on Juno, and they're getting 5% boost in voting power. Right? So if Amelia, a delegator, shows up and says, hey, which validator is she going to delegate to? Obviously, she's going to go delegate to notional because they have higher rewards. Where should I be aiming this? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's not great. That would lead to like validator centralization. So how do we avoid this? The trick is you don't use the validators as the fundamental unit when thinking about staking systems. You use delegators as the fundamental unit of when you think about staking systems. So, Amelia will come along and she'll stake her Osmo on the osmosis chain, lock it, and then she'll choose a validator to delegate to on osmosis. But what Amelia can do is she can choose any validator she wants to cross-stake to on Juno. So she could choose to cross-stake to Notional on Juno while still remaining staked to Figment on osmosis. And you can use the fact that validators are running on multiple chains as a nice UX feature. You can have it as a default that hey, if a validator is running on more chains, it'll automatically cross-stake to them. So let's say she delegated to Figment on osmosis, and it happens that Figment is also running on the Cosmos Hub. It can be a default option that she'll automatically cross-stake if she'd like. Now, and the same thing will happen. If any of her validators that she's cross-staked to does anything malicious, they will go. Her Osmo will get slashed. And so what this is doing is this is increasing the economic power that's securing the osmosis chain and every other chain in the system as well. Another question I get often is, doesn't this mean that another chain's validator set might be able to just completely overtake yours? And imagine someone like Binance. Binance has 7% of the validator power on the Cosmos Hub, but just given the economic power there, it's worth a lot of, I think it's worth around $160 million. And if they just, let's say they're the only validator that decided to cross-stake on a small chain, they could easily take over, get 67% total voting power on that small chain and take it over. So how do you solve this? Well, you just cap the amount of voting power that cross-staking can get. So, imagine on osmosis, we say, hey, atom cross-staking can only give a maximum of 10% of the voting power. So what will happen is, as more and more atom gets cross-staked, the voting power that atom makes up, atom cross-staking makes up on osmosis will go up. But once it hits the cap, more people can keep cross-staking. The economic value securing osmosis will keep going up, but just the voting power that you get per unit of atom will get diluted. And so, it still is using the full economic weight, just not giving one-to-one voting power, which is nice because, if you want to be fully optimally exposed to osmosis upside, we'd still prefer you to be staking Osmo rather than cross-staking atom. But it's a nice, a benefit that you have, that you're able to cross-stake the atom. So, why are chains going to do this? How are chains going to, choose who to cross-stake with? Well, if you look at NATO, right? Only 4 EU countries are not part of NATO. Countries that have high levels of economic interdependency want to have security relationships with each other. And so, we imagine something similar happening in the system, in Cosmos as well, where let's take something like Axelar and Osmosis. Osmosis makes up over 70% of Axelar's TVL right now. Meanwhile, 4 out of the top 10 assets on Osmosis are bridged by Axelar. Obviously, there's high levels of economic relationships here that we want to build a sort of joint security relationship with, such that from Osmosis' perspective, it would be highly beneficial to make sure Axelar is getting as much security as possible and lending our security to them to be able to do that. Same thing goes with something like Osmosis and the Mars protocol, right? Mars and Osmosis are building this sort of effectively joint leverage trading product together, have really high levels of economic relationships to each other. So of course they're going to want to, build some sort of economic, security relationship. In fact, Osmosis and Mars have such a high economic relationship. We're throwing this dank-ass party at Cosmoverse next week that you should all come to if you're going to be there, September 26th, Monday. Yeah. So, also, hint, which chain in Cosmos does everyone have high levels of economic relationship with, right? We are the biggest DEX for Evmos, a top 60 coin only listed on Osmosis, no real centralized exchange, right? That's pretty amazing. Or Juno, we're the biggest DEX for Juno as well. So, I think that obviously Osmosis is a place where a lot of Cosmos chains are going to want to build up these security relationships with. And, we kind of actually, I don't know if anyone remembers this idea that we used to have back, and we're still working on it, called interfluid staking. And if you think of it, it's actually sort of a format of this where, liquidity is security, where right now, so many chains have a lot of their assets and liquidity sitting on the Osmosis chain. They have high economic relationship with us. Interfluid, so we have this whole superfluid staking concept in Osmosis where you can use DeFi assets like LP shares in the proof of stake system of Osmosis, allowing you to sort of cross-stake the LP shares really is interfluid staking. It took us a while to realize this, that interfluid staking is just superfluid staking and cross-staking are these two ideas that we had combined into one. So, I'm really excited to see how, once interfluid staking comes about, that, all this liquidity that is on Osmosis, hundreds of billions of dollars, will be able to help secure this entire cross-chain ecosystem. But yeah, so I don't know, really excited to be building, this global mesh network of security and communication, and, let's avoid hub and spoke systems. So, thank you. I don't know how much time you have, but any questions?
How do two Cosmos chains between each other that they're
IBC.
So it's like an security or
Yep. Interchain query system. IBC is not just you can prove anything over IBC, right? And so yeah, there'll be a new interchain ICS, like interchain standard for proving cross-staking to each other. Yeah.
You said that a lot of Cosmos chains with interchain staking will use their value or at least max out on their set of Will they say like encompass in the top 25 in terms of stake power instead of the top 50?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think one of, I don't know if anyone saw my talk from Nebular Summit. I think one of the most valuable parts of having an app chain is that you control your MEV. And so I actually think that having your own chain decide block proposers, secure validation can be running by crossing. I actually think like on Osmosis, we only want to let Osmo choose where block producer, who gets you a block producer. And so in that case, you might want to have more validator sets for that, where you to have a more fair market for block production. But yeah, I think it could lead to smaller validator sets in general because of this cross-staking system. Yes.
Yeah, I'm new to Osmosis. Yeah, I find everything that you are presenting to be quite compelling, but I am not, like, I like the idea of these chains sort of interacting with governments and other sovereigns, but it's not clear to me how Osmosis fits into it. But that's what I'm curious to know.
So how Osmosis fits into it is we're just one of the nodes in this mesh network. We've been in Cosmos, we've been working towards this vision of app chains for a long time. And I believe that most applications are going to want to be the blockchain. But we always are hit with this question of, how is this system going to be secured? Like, you're not going to get Ethereum levels of security. And the thing is, this is our answer to it, where it's like, hey, by using this mesh security system, all the app chains summed together are going to have more security than like most L1s. And so this is app chains, these sovereign app chains are going to, I say Cosmos' rejection of the back protocol thesis. Our goal here is to kill the concept of like generalized layer 1 blockchain. We're going to have all these app chains securing each other. That's how we make a secure but sovereign systems.
And can you just clarify like what Cosmo is versus Osmosis and how they relate?
Yeah, so
And then other people ask questions.
Yeah. So Cosmos, all it is this Cosmos. Cosmos was this idea that the way to build blockchains is this network of many interoperating blockchains. Today I think the whole concept of many chains is obvious. Back when we started this 5 years ago, it was a very radical take. Everyone's like, everyone's just gonna build everything on Ethereum, right? So I think we see, the whole Cosmos vision is basically what's been happening over the last few years, finally playing out. And so now, I think the communication system has actually developed to be this very mesh system. Now the next thing to challenge everyone's assumptions here is everyone thinks that security is still going to remain Ethereum is going to be the settlement layer for everything, or Cosmos Hub is going to be the settlement layer for all of Cosmos. It's like, no. Security is also going to be mesh. It's meshes all the way down.
So what role do you see like Atom playing in this? Because it seems like Atom is like a very arbitrary participant in the country's security. suppose that like you guys kind of just cut off the IBC token, right? Like, in this scenario where there's a lot harder to kind of like get, you know, like hundreds of chains like cut off if a specific value set. Like how do you, what do you do that? Like what do you do in that case? Like, you just post like the governance mode? Does everybody do that in parallel? Like what is the
Yeah. So, okay, we'll take the first question first, which is what is the role of Adam here? And exactly, I think Adam is just, I don't think it has or deserves a privileged role in this system. I think, the Cosmos Hub chain, the Atom chain, needs to sort of stand on its own merits and like provide and there's like interesting stuff coming down the pipeline with like, actual value accrual for Atom as a token. But in the mesh, I don't think there should be any special privileged chain, basically.
it seems like it does the opposite of free value.
Yeah.
So
And at the end of the day, still, Atom has a very high market cap right now, and so, it will obviously be an important player in the mesh, right? Like, Osmosis has high economic dependency with Atom. It is the biggest non-Osmo asset on our DEX. It is our primary on-off ramp into the system. So, obviously we're going to want to do cross-chain staking with Cosmos Hub.
But this isn't the use case that Apple's looking for.
Right. The question about what happens if the value of one of the tokens in the system crashes to zero in a matter of
Not
days.
necessarily, just if you have like a bad value set that is like very kind of spread, like you
Yeah.
use it in a lot of parts of the mesh, but then the value is like for some reason like the
Yeah.
value of this token crash.
Yeah. So, throughout the entire Terra crash, the validator set never went Byzantine, right? Like they were always running fine, right? And the key is that like the point is that chains can cap their exposure. That was the whole point of the capped value of cross staking. We're like, hey, we can cap the amount of voting power and influence that this other chain has on our validator set. And the other, you can also use governance to kick out, cancel cross staking relationships. How to value cross staking tokens. You probably want to, Osmosis has TWAPs on chain that we will then export as, they currently use on the Osmosis chain, but we will export them as oracles that all Cosmos chains will use. So you can say hey, as the value of Luna is decreasing, decrease the cross staking power it has for your chain.
Okay, yeah, so you have to like kind of do like a two-op based.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, I guess, like the lack of fungibility? Like, let's say an asset is being routed, Osmos and Atom, cross-staking.
Right now, nothing is being multi-hop routed. Almost everything is being single hop routed. So let's say you have,
Isn't that a version of like
no, I'm saying nothing is being multi-hop routed. So right now, if you have, so let's say you want to send Osmo to the Juno chain, right? We're not going through the Cosmos hub. Nothing is actually using hub and spoke routing today. Everything is already using single hop. And so let's say you have Osmo and Juno, and you want to send it to Secret Network. What you do is you don't send it directly. You have to first send it back to Osmosis and then to Juno. Every chain.
that, like, I guess, doesn't that require hub and spoke model? Like, you still need throughput on the hub.
Every chain is the hub for its own native tokens. So yes, the Cosmos hub is the hub for Atom. Osmosis is the hub for Osmo. Juno is the hub for Juno. So yes, I guess it is a, from the perspective of a specific token, it is a hub and spoke system. But from the perspective of the system, there is no single hub and spoke system. Yes.
So I'm quite new to the same Cosmos system and shared security. So I just wanted to ask, for shared security, are there the same DLT attack vectors, specifically around computing methods in shared security, as in what is just an app chain and
I don't think it changes that too much. What the point of this whole system is to provide more slashable economic stake in the situation that things go wrong. So I don't think collusion gets easier or harder. It just makes sure that the cost of Byzantine behavior is much higher.
In a world where a lot of staking on Cosmos, we call it delegated from big staking. Where a lot of staking on Cosmos is liquid staking. Like we tried if there are implications for cross staking in terms of like liquid staking.
Yeah, so I think like liquid staking providers would become a lot more powerful and they get to choose like the cross staking as well. If they want to maintain fungibility, they have to have the same cross staking set as well, right? And so what they will, they'll become more powerful actors in the governance system, and that's why I have some qualms with the concept of liquid staking in general, but it's a hard thing to find. So yeah. But hopefully, I know actors like Stride are very, relatively have been really good actors, and they are very committed to making for decentralization. So if anything, cross staking allows for a little bit more decentralization of saying hey, you want to be distributing Osmos stake to a bunch of Osmos validators, but you also want to be cross staking to a lot of different validators and stuff as well. Cool. Yeah. You mean technically enable more validators or get more validated people running validators? Oh, the latter one. I don't know. I think a lot of people in the ETH2 community have been doing a lot of good work with that, with helping, make it, giving people free hardware to run validators and stuff. Honestly, I think a lot of, I feel like running the number of validators actually isn't really getting more people who want to run validators hasn't seemed to be a big issue. The bigger issue is making sure that we have, right now what we have is this really long tail of validators that have de minimis actual voting power, and voting power is still concentrated in the top 10, top 20 validators. So whether we had, that's honestly why we haven't we could actually easily increase the number of validators on Osmosis today. We currently I think have 118, I think, because that's the number of elements. But we can have we can up that to 500 tomorrow with no real impact or anything. But the problem is it's all the validators, it doesn't help the decentralization until we can figure out ways of getting the actual staking delegation distribution. Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up on the staking distribution. So this seems like it's gonna kind of increase centralization. Like 74%, 70% overlap. Whoever are those validators or staking or the Osmo land, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna have to get twice as big of a goal essentially, right? Or not twice as big of a goal. It's gonna reinforce their position in the ecosystem essentially, right?
Yeah.
The system where it seems to skew towards the people who own a lot of different
Yeah.
apps.
Not all. Yeah, some validators are really good at running on 50 chains, and some, only can run on a couple. Wow, right? And that's kind of why the whole point about don't treat validators as the fundamental unit, treat delegators as the fundamental unit, and you don't have to be cross-staked to the same validator on different chains. You could be cross-staked to one validator on Osmosis, but then cross-staked to a different validator for Juno, and then cross-staked for a different validator on Zero. So I'm hoping that will help make it so it's not you can only delegate to the ones that are know how to run all 50 chains. Maybe it's a bad idea to make it auto default to cross-staking if the same validator, that will maybe push people towards it, but making sure that doesn't auto default to that.
So a follow-up to that, say a big organization buy a bunch of different token contracts. So I want to stake them into different probably different chains, right? Is there any way to kind of make that more accessible and more just straightforward to I'm guessing not with the staking because it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
some kind of staking pool mechanism kind of thing. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot of UX improvements. You know, all the staking systems today are very primitive. I think that staking systems will become, as they become more complex, there's going to be like a lot of UX improvements that have to be done. So, you know, we're going to work on adding a staking dashboard into the Osmosis website, so we have a little bit more like ability to like get the UX correct. Like,
Yeah, and let's say I bought those up, and I can probably like Auto next to the Auto have like 50 bucks subscribe and then this or something, right? Like
Yeah.
I want to just have that sitting there when I delegate it. But then like I have a bunch of these things that feel like probably like they're accumulated by, right? So like, what are your thoughts on kind of maybe like putting those into staking use essentially, right? Like all these kind of small assets.
yeah. I mean, this is my thought on staking derivatives, I guess, largely, it seems. But I do think actually what happens is every DeFi protocol becomes its own staking derivatives platform, where, you know, who did this correctly? Say what you will about them, but like Anchor did this correctly, right? Because they said, no, we're not going to accept Luna as collateral. We're going to accept Luna, and then we're going to stake it ourselves, collect that staking yield, and figure out how to divert it. Now they use it to subsidize the dumb 20% yield. You know, the concept is right, where it's like, hey, let's say you are deposited into Mars protocol or into Ion DAO, or like superfluid staking is a type of this, where it says like, hey, you know, the DeFi protocol is the one that's doing the staking on behalf, and then the DeFi protocol can decide what does it want to do with that yield, right? It can say, hey, I'm gonna just return it to the people who provided the collateral, or I can give it as revenue to the governance token holders. So I don't know, I think different DeFi protocols are going to take different points on that, but I think that's how I see staking derivative systems actually working.
So then kind of like DeFi and staking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think DeFi protocols and staking derivative systems are going to work integrated. Yes.
In your example, you were saying that if I was a delegator and I stake to a validator on Osmosis that also has cross-chain abilities to nodes, I can also stake, basically stake to them as well.
My claim, you know, high level, top line right now, yeah, we can make that sort of default cross stake for them. Now, if we are worried that that is going to lead to a lot of validator centralization because of the US benefits of that, we can have that so it doesn't auto default to that it requires manual election.
Right. My question is more on what happens if the validator on a separate network is slashed or say double signing,
Yeah.
and they are a cross-staking validator as well. And
Yeah.
let's say I stake to one on Osmosis,
No.
all of you go outside, or the validator doesn't go outside. What happens to my stake as a delegator?
So as a delegator, you cross stake to the same validator on both.
Yeah.
Then yeah, your stake gets sloshed, even if it was on a different chain that you cross staked from. Yeah. And keep in mind, like the goal here is like cross staking isn't a replacement for actual staking, right? It's like, you know, if you want to be optimally exposed to Osmosis, you should still choose which token to, DYOR, pick which token to buy and stake based off of which platforms and applications you are the most bullish about, right? But cross staking is just a way of like it's a added bonus, right? So yeah. I think that's it. Cool. Thank you guys. Actually, you're gonna listen to me for another 30 minutes on the next panel. Thank you.
This guy's speaking next. What's up? Yeah.
What makes Office Paint different than any other system? What guides? This is not what no jacking. Yeah, but I think what else? I think it's like Susie and they thought it was insecure. I told them I fix it. So I think that the one is like, yeah.
I definitely, I already do a lot of it. Probably more.
Got it. So awesome. Thank you.
Is Babylon coming to Cosmos in any way?
Yeah, they're building a Cosmos SDK chain and helping other Cosmos SDK chains checkpoint into proof of work.
Oh, I did not even know that. Okay, cool. Yeah, my I guess 30-second summary would be that I think modular blockchains are the end game. I don't think they dominate everything. I think there's going to be like a very heterogeneous thing. There's going to be lots of just normal Cosmos type zones like standalone chains, and it's going to be a path to get there. Right? We're not going to get there overnight. It's going to take a long time and a lot of building. And so I hope that all of you contribute in some way. And so if you're interested to learn more, I'd love to talk to you guys because you guys are like the next generation.
Awesome. My concluding 30 seconds is, if you look at Ethereum today and the modular ecosystem around it, there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on, but there are still like massive problems. How do we get high data throughput? How do we get decentralized sequences? How do we get high security bridges like the one IBC has built? And if you're interested in any of these ideas, stop by at my talk at 4 o'clock today. I'm going to be presenting a vision for how Ethereum can actually upgrade itself in all these dimensions. Thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you guys.
John, Sunny.
Yeah, thank you all for joining the panel. So next up is the panel on climate, energy, and mining. So please welcome Vera, the moderator, to introduce herself and all the other panelists.
Okay, shall we get started? Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the Climate, Energy, and Mining session. I'm very excited to be the moderator. My name is Vera. I'm currently building my ReFi project for helping companies, individuals understanding their personal carbon footprint informations. And I'm just very honored to be joining this panelist with amazing people that are doing very impactful and long-term things. I actually want to move myself a little bit closer so we don't have distance that we are trying to building the ReFi ecosystem together. To start with, I really want to everyone join me to welcome our panelists. We have Sim from Galaxy, we have Joe from Sci-Fi Protocol, and also Marcus from ClimateDAO. And just give them a round of applause for doing something amazing for the long term. Why don't we start with like why you are here today and like what's drive you to this intersection with energy, climate and mining, and what are you currently doing with your company? Let's start with Marcus.
Sure. Hi everybody, glad to be here with you today. So I'm a contributor at Clean DAO. It's in the name, we're a DAO, which means that we do things a little bit differently than a traditional organization. But our objective is to modernize the voluntary carbon market and eventually utilize blockchain technology to scale environmental asset markets more generally. We're focused on carbon right now because it's sort of the most mature use case for this notion of an environmental asset or an ecosystem service credit, where basically people want to fund climate action, things like switching to renewable energy, using more efficient cook stoves or more efficient building designs, as well as directly removing carbon dioxide from the air using things like reforestation, mangrove planting, or even direct air capture, sucking the carbon dioxide out of the air and turning it into something more permanent to store. But right now, the market is really quite immature. It's been around for a couple of decades, but most of the transactions happen over the counter, meaning like you call a broker on the phone, and they send you an email, and you go back and forth for a few weeks, and maybe 2 or 3 months later, you actually get your credits in your hands, and you do something called retiring them, which is like consuming the underlying credit and claiming it for your own. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there. We're really just trying to basically use the existing DeFi technologies like AMM, SushiSwap, etc., to bring liquidity to carbon markets and build a sort of robust ecosystem for consuming those credits on chain.
Hey everyone, I'm Joel. I'm the founder of Safi Protocol. I'm also a member of Clima DAO. So Safi is actually a Swahili word for clean and pure. So what we do is we are a climate fintech firm focusing on project financing, all the renewable energy asset in emerging market. For example, I've been doing renewable energy and also project finance for almost 12 years right now. I built my career here in US. I also had a company in China before doing SaaS in renewable energy. One thing I figured is in order to solve the climate problem in general, we should figure out what is feasible, what is not. For example, I'm asking myself, okay, the solar financing market in the US is so mature. What about the emerging market? Do people actually care? Or do people just simply chasing for the cheapest solution for energy? So it's not only an energy access problem, but also how to channel those energy and resources into those markets. Not only need green energy, but also need energy to start with. Right? That's what we do. We channel, we financing all the solar wind project in those countries, and also we find people passionate about the environment, members of Clima DAO and all those, already we saw a lot of the members in Web3 community care about the environment, how people can channel their energy, expertise, resources into real world asset, into real world impact. That's what we are fighting for.
Hello everyone, my name is Simrit Deensa. I'm happy to be here, thank you for having me. So I work at Galaxy on the mining team. Our focus is across the mining industry on research, various different trends within the field, on lending. Basically, we work with miners to provide them financing against their ASICs or any infrastructure collateral. In addition, we help out on the advisory side, where we guide different boards in terms of which direction they want to move towards on treasury management, on energy hedging, and making sure that they're following a sustainable path. The last thing is we are actually building our own proprietary mining site. So we're actively looking at different types of products that miners want and demand, and providing those solutions to miners in the long term. I chose this team to really be a part of kind of the innovation and research in the mining realm, and how we can be leaders in the transition to sustainable energy.
Love it. I just love how diversified the panelists' background is, and it's kind of like we all draw to this panel because of the passion in climate changes and how we see the inefficiency in this market. And speaking about inefficiencies, probably a lot of audience here watched John Oliver's late night show a couple of weeks ago, how he was addressing the inefficiencies in the carbon market and how he was kind of scrutinizing on how players are not doing what they're supposed to do to deliver the environmental impact. So here I want to really ask our panelists, like, how do you think the mainstream Web2 players in this market should behave, and how we as innovative leaders in this field should really help them to rethinking this market? I will start with Sid.
Sure, so I'll focus this on how it kind of pertains to the Bitcoin mining industry. So for us at Galaxy, we are one of the founding members of the Bitcoin Mining Council. Now, as part of the founding, the definition of sustainable energy included renewables, nuclear, as well as carbon offsets. However, that has since changed, and now it's only renewables and nuclear energy. As a proprietary miner that we actually do not use carbon offsets in any way. And Bitcoin mining in general can help lead that transition away from carbon-based energy, that decarbonization transition, as well as focus on reducing emissions for the longer term. The thing with that, the beauty of the network and the beauty of the way that Bitcoin mining works is that it's a flexible load, meaning that you can ramp up and ramp down as needed. And in an environment when we're transitioning from carbon-based energy to renewables, you actually need that flexibility and demand because the supply side has become increasingly inelastic. So that's kind of how Galaxy is really trying to position ourselves, how we're trying to focus our proprietary mining and overall our sustainable energy goals.
Thank you. How about
For the audience who have not seen that piece, I will do a very quick recap on what John said. So what John is saying is essentially asking a question of additionality, right? Saying, okay, people after they buying carbon credit, they feel pretty good about themselves as corporate and copper pollute the environment. Then can you just buy your way out, right? Can you just say, okay, I buy those amount of carbon credit generated by this forest, and this forest will not be cut because of me. But instead of that, people choose to cut the forest next to it, right? So in other words, how actually carbon offsetting or the concept of carbon offsetting is actually going to resolve the issue. So my take on that is two pieces. One is additionality. Another piece is external impact. So one of the metaphor I'm thinking is, in order to cure a disease, are you actually going to cure it, or you are going to eat a bunch of painkillers, right? So buying carbon credit, I mean, if you guys check the price on carbon credit, it's actually a fraction of the profit those companies are making. That has been saying they spend very little money, they feel great about themselves, they have been keep telling their customers about it, and they move on. They didn't change their behavior at all, right? So my take on that is, number one, we need to find a way to actually replace our current behavior. Using our business model, for example, in order to financing more renewable energy, we are replacing the fossil fuel in the system. When you do that, it's essentially changing the fundamentals of how the carbon dioxide has been generated in the first place, right? The second piece is external impact. So one piece in John's clip is, right now we pollute 40x compared before the industrial happened. Do we have 40x of land to plant more trees? When people talk about carbon credit, people are thinking about planting trees. So how we can connect the dots to make sure we can actually stabilizing our GHG pollution in general. So again, my answer to that is we need to be very careful about changing our behavior rather than simply paying for some carbon credit, eat the painkiller, move on. It's not really the case. We need to change our behavior from every fundamental, every corner with you. So that's my
Yeah, I 100% agree on this. Consumer behavior changes is one of the fundamentals or the key focus for in order making really deliver this kind of long-term environmental impact. And I understand Marcus from his Web2 data world before for almost a decade, and you have coming from that kind of like data analytical background, like how do you feel like the data of carbon in terms of consistency as well as the transparency for us to really understanding what Joe mentioned about consumer behavior change?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So in terms of the transparency of the traditional carbon markets, it's quite poor. Like I was saying earlier, the nature of the over-the-counter market for most of these credits means that nobody really knows what prices are being paid, or sometimes, in some cases, who is actually retiring the credits. So there's this phenomenon where people will retire credits and leave the beneficiary, sort of the person who's going to receive the credit, blank. So we don't really know which companies are consuming that. This is a limitation of the traditional data infrastructure being used by centralized registries like Vera, and they're basically running a SQL database with the ability to read and write, and really the only way you can write into it is by retiring credits. I wanted to circle back though on something you were saying earlier around additionality and sort of behavior change, because the original premise, especially some of the earlier methodologies in the carbon credit market, was to incentivize behavior change on the part of organizations primarily that are doing things that are polluting. So like power grid operator, for instance, has power plants, they're operating a coal-fired power plant, they might want to switch to renewables, but especially about 10 or 15 years ago, before renewables had reached scale, it was not profitable to do so. And so the additionality question comes in that if the cost to implement a more renewable technology is higher than the amount you would make from doing that, carbon credits can be used to fill that gap. This was sort of the original approach. Nowadays, we talk about planting trees because sort of the market has moved beyond some of the basic avoidance credits, like installing renewables, onto things like removals, where you're planting trees or restoring mangroves or some other activity that's going to net draw down. There's also technology-based avoidance. I was talking about earlier, direct air capture, but these technologies are all very nascent. The current state of the market is quite small. We're talking like thousands of tons, whereas the Vera and Gold Standard, the traditional registries, are mostly filled with avoidance credits, for either protecting things like rainforests or installing renewables or similar, and that's on the scale of hundreds of millions of tons. So there's really a massive scale-up required for the removal sector, and I do think that carbon credits as a financial technology have a role to play in funding the development of that removal market, but it is definitely not like a panacea. We need to see companies reducing their emissions as part of the greenhouse gas protocol or the science-based targets standard. They should be first reducing emissions where possible and only then consuming offsets or credits. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Actually, can I reply to the John Oliver piece?
Of course.
Because I just want to, he raises some valid criticisms, and I want to be honest about that there are problems in the current market. And in fact, our whole value proposition at Klima is that we think blockchain can offer a solution to some of those problems, most specifically on the demand side around the lack of transparency. The sort of frustration I have with the piece is that he doesn't point to any solutions to these problems. In fact, if anything, at the end of the piece, he sort of throws the whole thing under a bus by starting up his own fraudulent registry, which really, to me, is a very, it indicates that his research team didn't actually conduct much diligence on how the registry system is structured, because that's the whole point of these registries like Vera, is that they have a reputation, they have a board of scientists that review the methodologies that are submitted by the projects. So there's room for improvement, I would say, and he points to some legitimate issues, but there are also solutions on the horizon and even at hand to address some of those shortfalls.
Yeah, speaking of rooms of improvements, I also want to mention about regulation. I think that's one of also very important in the carbon market space. And before I jump into the regulation piece, I also want to give us the last speakers a chance to really introduce himself, and more importantly, tell us, maybe share a little bit his background, why he's joining us here today at this panel.
Thanks so much, Vera. I actually rode the electric bike all the way down from Midtown, so I'm super late, but it was a process of reducing some footprint getting here. My name is Max. I'm the founder and CEO of Carbonbase, and over the last 3 years, we've been very interested in applying technology, data science, and blockchain to sort of make a significant dent. I live currently in Hong Kong, so I focused on the Asian side. As you know, China is a big source of emissions, 27% of the global emissions. India is about 6.6%, bigger than all of continental Europe, Indonesia, Japan. So I think Asia and 5 or 6 countries encapsulate about half the world, right? And here in New York City, in New York Climate Week, I think one of the key focuses that I really want to think about is actually how do we use the best of tools, technology to actually create global carbon markets with a strong representation in Asia. So one of my collaborators, he's the head of blockchain at Oracle, he actually owns farms in India, and so he's personally wanted to donate his wealth to actually create, trees. And when he looked at the registration process for using Very Good Standard, he knows that it costs anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 per project. For that cost, you can actually do another entire forestry project. And so he was like, well, we come from technology backgrounds, can we actually reduce the cost of verification, make it much more scalable? And living in Hong Kong for 11 years, I have had for several years, had a chance to actually be part of ecosystems, and recently was appointed to be a board member of a virtual bank in Hong Kong. So this bank is the Ping An One Connect Bank. For some of you guys Chinese, Ping An is a big insurance company. It's the first Chinese asset manager that signed the UNPRI. It's a very big milestone actually for kind of sustainability. We built a virtual bank from the ground up that was actually 1/100th the cost of account servicing compared to HSBC. And so there's a lot of people who couldn't afford to open bank accounts traditionally because it just cost too much. And we were able to actually make it very economically available. So this kind of led to a set of thinking around how do we design a new carbon registry from the ground up that is fundamentally data powered and actually can incentivize people in Indonesia, in India, Bhutan, Malaysia, actually draw down carbon and earn a living. You guys have heard of the play to earn concept? Some of you guys? So we're calling it preserve to earn. You preserve the planet, you earn money. And we're on this journey and actually sort of creating a new carbon registry. And there's a lot of problems we observe in existing registries. A lot of amazing people on the panel here who thought about this. Vera's deeply considered how we engage more individuals to participate. But I just want to highlight this kind of concept that what we're doing with the registry, fundamentally the whole carbon markets, is we're rebasing the entire economic value attribution to things that are good for the planet. Right? Instead of taking them as externalities, we're actually baking them into fundamental financial instruments, and then we can actually point the mega nozzles of Wall Street, of the family offices, of the pension funds, into actually financing for the market. So the last thing I want to just leave you with is an acronym that I hope you guys Google one day. It stands for CQE, and the acronym is Carbon Quantitative Easing. And if you guys want to talk about that, find me afterwards. Thanks.
Love it. Speaking about quantitative easing, back to the regulations and authorities. So how should we really work with authorities and regulators? And more importantly, do we even need endorsement? Like we have innovators like Max trying to really build a new registry for us. So why don't we start with Marcus?
Sure. I guess I'll subdivide this question into 2 segments. One is around interfacing with the incumbent organizations in the VCM, like the registries and other organizations that operate. And the other side is government, and the regulatory concerns. So I'll first talk about the legacy carbon market. So we think it's important to engage with the traditional registries, especially because this market is fundamentally built on trust and credibility. It's going to take time for the new technologies that are coming online to establish the same level of trust and credibility with the existing buyers, or mostly large corporations, that Vera and Gold Standard and the like have established. So we're really trying to bridge the gap where we want to support the existing standards while we sort of nurture the development of new approaches. So right now, all the credits in the Clean Down Treasury are Vera issued credits, but over the next few months, our plan is to start integrating new credit types from Web3 native organizations like Regen Network and Nori. We're sort of evaluating these different approaches because there's a lot of different approaches, and actually telling which ones are solving the problem and which ones are not takes some time and diligence. And then on the regulatory side, so we've been engaging with lawmakers over the last few months. Most notably, we worked with Senators Lomas and Gillibrand on a draft of their bill to really start to crystallize some of the basic concepts around Web3 and crypto that will be required for more precise and targeted regulation down the line. So their bill is really more of a framework. It's probably not going to pass in its current form, but what's happening is little bits and pieces are being carved off and created into more specific legislation. Specifically, we provided input on the definition of a DAO. Originally, DAOs were defined as requiring an LLC in a US jurisdiction. We worked with them to help them understand that a lot of DAOs are global in nature. We have contributors from all over the world, and so having a more broad definition that you need to have some legal structure. You don't necessarily need to incorporate as an LLC in the US. We were able to get that language extended a bit. And yes, I think it's important to engage. I don't think we should be afraid of regulators. They want to learn, and so a big part of the onus is on us as the crypto community to go to Washington, to go to the centers of power throughout the world and evangelize for the technology and show off these real-world use cases that we're all working on.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like the beauty of Web3 is not replacing Web2, but it's creating the synergy between Web2 and Web3 and helping to improve the efficiency of the market. Joe, what's your opinion on this?
I have a slightly different view with Marcus. So the first piece, I think we are on the same page, which on the current stage, we need to work with them. We need to get their endorsement or working within the framework to get the job done or get access to traditional corporate, which because to your point, trust and credit is everything in this market, right? But I do want to say that I'm hoping more protocols, especially more startups, can spicy the things up a little bit, right? So in other words, one example, I actually telling Vera yesterday. So this week is also the climate for UN, right? I was in one of the panel, which we have Vera, Gold Standard, all the and Car on the panel. They're talking about their ideas, innovations about blockchain. So after the panel, I asked a question for a representative for Go. I was saying, okay, I love your idea. Obviously, you guys are open to working with more blockchain-based technologies. Can you kind of tell me more what you are working on recently? This lady probably told me that, oh, we have a working group for 3.5 years. We're actively working on that. So what I heard is, okay, you guys have been talking about it for 3.5 years and you don't have an MVP even to launch or communicate over to the market. Right? That's why I'm thinking more competitions, for example, more startups or entrepreneurs like Max, when people having more methodologies and more different things, spicy things up, the market will be more and more aware of what's going on and also hoping to pushing the whole thing into a more real, more unbiased methodology everybody use, right? Yeah, that's my take. In other words, working with them, spicy things up a little bit. If they don't keep up, next 10 years, hopefully a newer version will emerge.
Yeah, it's definitely a slow progress. What do you think, Sim?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it very much comes down to educating the general public as well as elected officials on, specifically with the mining realm, what Bitcoin mining is and how it can play into the general energy mix. For us, as we're part of the Bitcoin Mining Council, and we actively try and participate in educating the general public through research that we post online, through our Galaxy Grades podcast, through other forms of general communication with the public. And it ultimately comes down to, again, what is Bitcoin mining, how it can interact with the grid, and how it can lead the transition to renewables and sustainable energy. It all boils down again to the fact that Bitcoin mining is in itself a flexible load, which kind of going back to Marcus's point, these are very capital intensive projects. It's not easy to just shift over to a completely renewable environment. And given the intermittency of renewables, Bitcoin mining can ramp up during periods where there is superfluous energy and then ramp down when energy is needed to provide back to the general consumer. So, I think it ultimately boils down to, again, educating the public. How can we go out there and as leaders in the community interact with some of the regulators to really show what the innovation is?
Yeah, I think education is really important for bringing awareness and also just for people to get to know and get the simple access to carbon market. And one of the initiatives I do with my startup is actually we create a carbon academy for helping not only consumers but also investors and all the stakeholders in the community understanding carbon market, understanding their carbon footprint. So speaking about education, I feel like for me it's very exciting. It's an opportunity for us to create a new chapter for this market, but also it comes with a lot of challenges. All the panelists have mentioned the regulation piece, the kind of like slow process, and also like a lot of people are not aware of certain information. So if you have to pick among all those like challenges and opportunities you have faced through your kind of like journey in carbon market, I want you to share like what is your biggest challenges and opportunities so far. And I will start with Max, since you are doing a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah, maybe just a quick comment on regulation. It's kind of controversial, but I love regulation. I'm such a big fan of regulation because this entire climate change market doesn't exist without regulation. Like, why would anyone want to pay extra except because they're forced to? So one of my other projects is we're building the sustainable Bitcoin protocol. So we're making large list miners in the United States carbon neutral with their energy usage. Like the White House publishing this particular bill, like this sort of announcement, is the best business development for us, right? Better than anyone else, like any marketing person. We joke actually in China where we work sometimes. The government actually is our best BD because President Xi's declaration of carbon neutrality as a country has forced every single person in China to think about carbon neutrality, and now it's become these 3 letters, right? These 太融合 now matters to 1.4 billion people. And so I think that actually what we need to do is we need to intelligently force and actually incentivize regulators and people who are actually driving this to increase, right, the strictness by which actually this market accelerates. And we see this in New York City. It's something really exciting happening right now. It's called Local Law 97. And it's going to force all the building managers to actually start paying for carbon to the tune of $260 a ton, which for the guys in carbon markets, that's a lot of money. And so to me, I think what we want to do is actually to really create government policies. And so we're very lucky in Hong Kong, we hired the ESG director of the Hong Kong Central Bank actually to go and BD other central banks. We're going to go and convince the world central banks to start allocating a portion of their monetary policy making specifically on climate change. And I think that's going to create a generation of entrepreneurs who actually see that this is actually a pathway to supporting the planet, realizing their personal sort of philosophy on life, and also the sort of necessary transition we can go through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again the big challenge with kind of shifting over completely to the renewable side of things is, again, it's also just the capital-intensive nature of these endeavors. Kind of going back to the education piece, there are companies out there, mining companies out there that are currently taking active efforts to not only reduce emissions, but also transition and partner with renewables to co-locate and expand Bitcoin mining opportunities, and that would allow for more streamlined cash flows and a transition to that renewable. So one that Galaxy has partnered with is a firm called ACDC. They focus on co-locating with renewable energy providers that power their data centers. So providing that streamlined cash flow that makes it easier to have these large-scale investors, like you were mentioning, kind of with the pension funds and the traditional Wall Street banks coming in and being able to actually funnel additional capital into this environment. I think that right now is the challenge in terms of that communication. You also have companies like Crusoe that are working on using flared gas emissions to power their overall operations. And again, this flared gas would otherwise be emitted into the environment with exponentially more harmful emissions than carbon dioxide. So it's things like that. It's those use cases that are challenging to communicate with the regulators, but again, also presents an opportunity, because once it can catch on, it could lead that transition to the renewable side of things.
First thing I want to say is I cannot agree with Max more. Regulator is always a friend. In the case of environmental action in general. So one thing actually I want to offer to all the audience here is, have you guys think about solar, how much the price have went down since the very beginning of the technology? So since I started, the solar, the cost of building solar per kWh on basis went down about 87%. 87%, everyone. So in other words, right now we are talking about, oh, solar still more expensive than coal or still more expensive than natural gas. But think about, 6 years later, 10 years later, solar are so expensive. That's even impossible if the government is not incentivized, creating incentivized program for those. So that has been saying, if you think about fossil fuels and you think about renewable energy by its nature, renewable energy with the scale economy, it will go cheaper and cheaper. And fossil fuel, because it's natural resources, it will be more and more expensive. So there is a point of time they will meet each other. They will say hi in an awkward way. And after that, essentially, renewable will be cheaper, greener in every way. Nobody will burn coal anymore because it don't make sense. It's more expensive. Why you burn coal? So the key here for this topic is how we bridge to that point, how we design all those resources, monies, people's awareness, so that it's reaching to that point. So to answer that question, Mara's question was, what's the challenge and the opportunity? My answer is probably pricing and the risk. Right? How to pricing the risk, or how you mitigate the risk across the value chain. So back to Marco's point on the previous question, should we avoided offset be the same price with carbon capture? They should not. Right? Right now, carbon credit is carbon credit is carbon credit. I think we should have a credit system, a well-established credit system, so people can buy different layer, different quality, different quantity of carbon accordingly, so that you are essentially not incentivized one technology, but multiple technology in multiple regions, right? So external impact is part of the equation, but my view is the biggest challenge is essentially how you provide transparency correlated with the risk, so that moving forward everybody is on the same page. Nobody is going to jump out as John saying, "Oh, it's all wrong, and I'm not going to contribute anything. I'm going to throw everybody out of the bus." Right?
Yeah, I imagine it's both a challenge and an opportunity to be pursuing central bankers. Max, I want to reference a book that I know both Max and I really value, The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's sort of where Max and I, both of our projects, are sort of drawing inspiration from. And in the book, it takes quite a lot of doing to get the central banks to actually move on this issue. And what ends up being one of the catalysts is the adoption of a decentralized social media platform called ULOC. And basically, people end up using this platform to start consuming carbon credits, and it's sort of the killer use case for this credit. So we're sort of taking the other side of the approach, starting from building a cool technology that we think is improving the status quo, and hopefully eventually down the line that will scale up and maybe be picked up by central bankers once the sort of space is more mature and we have more robust systems that are at the adequate scale for trillions of dollars of capital to start coming in. So I think the biggest challenge for us, at least in the sort of segments of the market that we're working, is how do you model the risk of forward funding a carbon credit project. So they need capital up front to go and get the supplies and pay the people on the ground. And right now the way these deals are structured is they're sort of bilateral VERPAs, which is a technical finance thing, but basically they're agreements between some capital provider, like a financial institution or a broker in carbon credits, who gives upfront capital, and they're taking on the delivery risk that credit project might never actually deliver. They might deliver less than they originally anticipated. So figuring out an appropriate way to model those risks associated with forward funding a project is going to be really important for us to scale up the market.
Yeah, it seems like there are a lot of opportunities, and also there are a lot of thinkings on our panelists' mind that we want to take the action. So I always like this quote from Bill Gates talking about people always overestimate what will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate what will occur in the next 10. So I really want to ask the panelists here, if you imagine 2 years later, we are sitting in this room again doing this awesome blockchain conference with Columbia University, and also 10 years later, what would you think about your project and also the entire carbon market and also the sensibility practice? I will, yeah. Yeah, maybe
Sure, I
Marcus.
go first. Yeah. So in 10 years, I think one way or the other, the VCM as it stands now will have migrated onto the blockchain. Whether that's a public blockchain like Polygon where we run, or it's a private DLT solution that the incumbents decide to go with. there will be a blockchain in place because it's a really well-suited technology for digital assets like carbon credits. In terms of the scale, the way I look at it is like either we've successfully scaled the market like 10 to 20x, or really, really bad stuff is going to start happening. Stuff like what happens in the ministry for the future, because by 2030 or so, we're going to have locked in some of the worst consequences unless we have large-scale removals going, and that's got to happen in the next 10 years or so. So yeah, either very bad catastrophic climate outcomes, or we scale the market like 10 to 20x.
For the next year, for the whole Web3 community, I just feel we should see more and more real-world DeFi, or kind of a Web3 went to the real world, making real impact, changing people's life. Not only people playing with NFT, nothing wrong with that, but also people are not familiar with the industry, also kind of seeing the impact we are making here, right? And in our project, we hopefully next year we are launching more markets, so people developing project in those markets actually got funded for the solar for schools, solar for hospitals, so they are actually using and benefit from those. For 10 years, one thing I agree, and also I heard so much this week, a lot of scientists this week from UN are saying we have 10 years. In other words, after 10 years, the temperature will increase beyond the threshold, and essentially something terrible will happen, right? My view on that is, I feel, human race has been talking about that for a long time. There will be one day everything went down, everything burned, big flop. It's never happened because we collectively are smarter than we thought. We think, collectively are stupider, but not really. There are enough smart people in the population actually are figuring a lot of innovative way to do that. So my vision is, my view is more optimistic. I feel we can avoid that, and more importantly, I feel 10 years later, we will not be sitting here talking about, this very topic, because it's part of our nature, part of the community, part of the society. So we are talking about maybe moving to Mars or talking about something else, right? So yes, that's my view on what happened after 10, a decade later, and extremely optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think with regards to mining, I very much in the longer term love to see just more projects like AC/DC. Again, these guys are partnering with renewable energy generators that then power the data centers that they use to mine Bitcoin. And if you look at the broader grid and the stability of the grid, in particular in deregulated markets like ERCOT, introducing a lot of the intermittent renewable energy, it can provide some stress on the grid. It's not the same kind of standard fluid amount of energy that you're able to get, but obviously with the transition to renewables, we need to be able to maintain that standard and operate in an environment where there is the ability to kind of adjust demand flexibly so that it can cooperate with the supply side. So in the longer term, we'd love to see kind of additional projects where miners are partnering with some of the renewable energy generators to provide that additional stability to the overall grid and transition us away from carbon-based energy sources.
Just said my company did. So I want to give you guys a few kind of like potential things that can happen, right? So the first is, we have a registry that's able to actually incorporate individual and collective action and just issue credits directly to people, individuals, on an account. And then the credits are off taken by the amazing DeFi protocols and ReFi protocols being built. And so you can earn a living economically by putting carbon in the ground as an individual and also as a company. And hopefully we employ like 100 million people around the world who earn a living through their actual decarbonization efforts. I think it's totally possible. Second is, I think that there is an opportunity to create more. So, to Mark's point, like convincing central banks to do something is really hard. But in addition to CQE, carbon quantitative easing, where the central banks print money to incentivize this, we also can do something called CCQE, right? And C here stands for corporate and also stands for crypto. Corporate and or crypto carbon quantitative easing. So example of this right now is Stripe. Stripe, Microsoft, and Shopify put together a $925 million fund to buy carbon credits. they're paying $300 to $2,000 a ton. That is a serious amount of money. People are getting out of bed and waking up and trying to figure out how they actually can earn some of this $2,000 per ton situation, and that's creating a bunch of stimulus. So we're working with some of the people designing this fund and actually trying to launch an equivalent version of this in other sectors, in real estate and shipping and transportation, but also for central banks. And there's a precedent for this. And this is not happening in isolation. There's a concept called AMC, Advanced Market Commitment. And AMCs are the way that we built vaccines during the pandemic. Actually, the pharmaceutical companies were not willing to put in the money first to develop a vaccine. The US government said, here is a bunch of cash. If you can make a COVID vaccine, there's cash waiting for you right here. And that actually stimulated the entire vaccine production. So there's a similar concept, public good funding happening exactly in carbon markets, waiting to happen. And so that's something that is available and I think quite very small. Last thing I want to say, this is kind of a crazy idea, is that I hope to go to COP this year, COP27, and I hope to use that opportunity actually to start a new country. We're going to build a new nation state, actually at the border of Sudan and Egypt. It is the last piece of unclaimed land in the world. It's a piece of desert, and we're going to make it a refi nation state. And this nation state is going to register all of the people's desire to actually have refi companies, and then we're going to get observer status at the UN, and we're going to use our country status to basically BD other countries. And so as I think about building a carbon central bank, I was like, okay, well, we need a country along with our central bank, so this is kind of conflict. So if anyone wants to be a founding member of a country, you guys are all invited. It's going to be very exciting. The passport is going to be priced in carbon credits. So you actually show up with $1,000 in carbon credits to be able to earn a passport. And that's going to be the beginning of how we build a new civilization.
Sorry, we are running out of time. So please follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, any sort of channels, because I think by the end of the day we are all educators in this space, really helping people to understanding this market a little bit more. So if you have any questions, please get connected with any of us. I think sometimes I got frustrated when I was working in this space, figure how little people know about this space, but it's just fascinating to find all the peers of people here that are willing to devote and get committed to this area. So I really want to shout out to all the people who care about climate also by starting doing smaller things like attending these sessions. And I hope after this session you can educate more people around you and getting them to get to know more about this space.
I also want to thank Vera, because she's an amazing moderator and really put this down together. And her own company is phenomenal. So if you guys want to work in refi, please talk to Vera too.
Thank you.
Yeah.